Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining A4LI for this month's policy discussion. I'm very excited for the conversation we have planned today, and I hope all of you are as well. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Brianna Deutsch, VP of Political Affairs at A4LI. In today's conversation, I'll run a discussion with Bernard Siegal. Bernie is the founder and executive director of the nonprofit Regenerative Medicine Foundation, where he and his team have advocated for policies that create pathways for regenerative medicines to reach the public. He is also the co-chair of the annual World Stem Cell Summit, which will be taking place virtually June 6th through the 11th. In this conversation today, we'll discuss how and why Bernie left his legal career to become an advocate for stem cell and regenerative medicine, and what advice he can give the longevity community regarding how to work with Capitol Hill and to push policy change forward. So Bernie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start at the beginning. You started your career out as an attorney, but in 2002, you took on a controversial case about human cloning. And as a result, your career path took a dramatic turn. So can you tell us a little bit about this period of time and why the public reaction to issues covered in this particular case made you decide to leave your legal career and to become a regenerative medicine advocate?
Well, thank you. So it's a well-worn tale. I did a TEDx talk once about, I never wanted to tell the origin story again because I've talked about it so many times, but I'll share this with you, Brianna, and the longevity community. I was a practicing lawyer in Miami for many years, having my own firm. And I am a cancer survivor. Way back in 1997, I was diagnosed with colon cancer and had a challenging year, but survived and did not have a reoccurrence. But that was quite an adjustment for me at age 48. It makes you reevaluate a lot of things that one might do in their life. And so it was with me. One of the things that I became a champion of and I felt I owed my life to was, of course, the advances in biomedical science and the treatments that I had. And when I became a proponent, at that time I became a proponent for science and research. Later, there was a controversy about stem cell research, embryonic stem cell research. And in President George W. Bush's very first speech ever to the American public in August 2001, he talked about stem cell research. And there were restrictions from the National Institutes of Health and the federal government for funding new stem cell lines using embryonic stem cells. Well, cell therapies are a whole new pillar of medicine. Think about drugs, biologics, medical devices, and then cell therapies, and a new way of delivering potential treatments and cures. So I became interested in that field. A short time later, there was an announcement in December 2000, I'm going back a long way, 2002. 2002, a group claimed they cloned the first baby. This was a public announcement brought live on CNN and around the world. And at the time, cloning of humans was thought to be around the corner. Cloning being a sledgehammer word, as you can imagine. And it raised a tremendous amount of controversy and public attention. They made this announcement, this group, from Broward County, Florida, which is the same area that I practice law and live in South Florida. Now, as a child advocate and a children's rights advocate in the early part of my legal career in dependency court, I knew that anyone who was aware of a potentially cloned child could bring a legal action and bring it to the court's attention. I brought it to the court's attention in a motion for temporary guardian, and that set the world on fire at the time. After all, humans have only been reproducing with sexual reproduction, not asexual reproduction. So this was extraordinary, and it played as a major cause célèbre for over 30 days became an actual court case. And as a result, I burst the bubble of bad publicity, and people thought that this group that made this announcement and made headlines all over the planet was just a publicity stunt. I had realized at that time that cloning, and as it relates to stem cell research, was a burning issue, not only in the United States, but around the world. And reproductive technologies had controversy to it. I also realized that lawmakers were being stampeded to pass laws that would fine and imprison doctors and scientists doing embryonic stem cell research, and even possibly patients who would be availing themselves of the benefits of this research. It struck me as being unfair and wrong and an artificial reason to stop scientists. It was an issue hijacked into the abortion debate in the United States at the time, and issues that still are in the here and now. And opponents of stem cell research, embryonic stem cell research, if you conflate a human being at the point of conception becomes a person, then there is something immoral about taking embryos, even surplus embryos from IVF, and donating them to science, otherwise medical waste, to create embryonic stem cells that could turn into any kind of tissue in the human body. As I realized that, I fell in with the top scientists of the world who invited me to the very first meeting of the International Society for Stem Cell Research, because they saw me as someone who stood up for legitimate science. And as a result of that meeting, the first one ever in Washington, D.C., I realized everyone was a scientist, 650, and I seemed to be the only patient advocate. At which point the scientist invited me to become a ad hoc de facto legal mouthpiece for the field of embryonic stem cell research, which was a red hot wedge issue in American politics. And many of the top scientists, such as Rudolf Janisch at MIT and Ian Wilmot, Dolly the sheep's father, joined a science advisory board of a nonprofit. And as a person that believes and has believed throughout my career and professional career, that sometimes if you're the only person doing something, you may as well go down the path. So I left my practice of law. At the time I still had a kid in college, but this is what I chose to do. And I said, I'm going to devote myself to patient advocacy and bringing the world knowledge about a potentially beneficial scientific technology, and became totally engrossed in the field and tried to develop strategies and programming and advocacy that would be effective to get the job done.
So, oh, sorry, continue.
Well, continue. The story goes on because one of the first issues that came to light was a gambit in the United Nations, really supported at the time by the Vatican, the social conservative Bush administration, to declare cloning a moral outrage and essentially a crime, and morally condemn it by world treaty. And this was sort of a side issue in the broader debate over embryonic stem cell research. I became aware of that, interestingly, in a law review article, and where I first heard of it, and got to know the journalists covering the United Nations and realized this was a full court international pressure campaign. And of course, cloning babies, bad. There are many arguments against that. Cloning stem cells, that at time was thought as a meritorious way to be able to get cells to create valuable cell therapies. I organized with groups of patient advocates and scientists and other groups of stakeholders a worldwide campaign to fight that treaty. And to make a long story short, we were able to derail the treaty by a single vote and the legal committee of the UN. I learned about the United Nations. I was there lobbying the halls with other NGOs and representatives. And that at that time, circa 2004, I sort of got a halo around my head, and the nonprofit organization that I had created called the Genetics Policy Institute, now known as the Regenerative Medicine Foundation. And we realized that there were ways to counteract the then social conservative movement that wanted to constrain this kind of research, and also hold back, I would submit, a lot of the enabling technologies that were going to bring this to fruition. There were other campaigns as well, Brianna, including fighting restrictions to funding embryonic stem cell research in the United States, filing a court case in the Shirley versus Sebelius. My organization filed a friend to court brief to be able to overturn the Bush administration restrictions on this funding, and bringing it up almost to the present, where we were lobbying to get the regenerative medicine advanced therapies criteria in the 20th Century Cures Act. In other words, what we did is forge a movement to advance these technologies. And it went beyond just embryonic stem cell research to adopt all and support all of these cell therapies, whether they were adult stem cells, whatever the source, to be able to champion, to get more funding, federal funding, to enable business and industry to invest in it, to support the enabling technologies in bioprinting, microscopy, AI, but understanding at all times that there were two sides to the argument, and having to use every tool in the tool chest of advocates in order to really, really create a vibrant movement that passed Prop 17 and Prop 14 in California. And those were state initiatives, unlike any other that have ever happened. A $12 billion successful campaign to create the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. All of these advocacy efforts show what can be done if you can effectively organize the right movement.
Sort of building off of that backstory, which is sort of just interesting to hear, because, you know, here you've started your advocacy nearly 20 years ago, and the longevity biotech industry, we're a little bit newer, so there's so much we can learn. And not unlike, you know, the longevity biotech industry, the stem cell and regenerative medicine community has sort of been plagued with this longstanding well, either misconceptions or sort of incomplete information about the science. So can you speak with us a little bit about sort of the strategies you use to set the record straight, especially with members of Congress and members of the public who may have had sort of a religious bias against what they believed this research was?
So I think that when one looks at a advocacy campaign, you have to really look at the ecosystem of the stakeholders involved. That's exactly what we did with stem cells, and it's exactly what is called for the field of longevity. I happened to learn about longevity in the intersection with stem cells with a conference called the SINS conference in University of Cambridge, where I was speaking. It was one of Aubrey de Grey's conferences years ago. And that's when I learned a lot more about the movement. And when we think about the stem cell and regenerative medicine ecosystem, in your minds, compare and contrast with the ecosystems for your field, our field of longevity and health span. Think about it in this way, and it's important because we're going to lead to how we're going to influence Congress. Think about the science and medical side of the ecosystem, the scientific societies, the medical specialties. Think about another segment, the societal side of what we're doing. We had to think about advocacy, medical philanthropies, societal and religious pro and con, in the case of cloning, transhumanism, religion. Think about environmental issues. That's another segment to analyze. And then, of course, the public policy side, the one, Brianna, where you're a specialist, of government, law, geopolitical considerations, human rights, and ethics. And then yet another segment of it is public perception, popular culture, literature, and the perception of all of these futuristic technologies. And finally, the industry, investors in biotech and facilities and workforce development. I would submit that a sophisticated look at all of the stakeholders, who is opposed, who's happy, where is pharmaceutical, and all of this, where are the patient advocates, the real driving force, I would submit, in all of this. You have to put all of this into your ecosystem, figure out whose ox is being gored, who is going to win, who is going to lose, and create a public voice and mandate for public appreciation. And as it turns out, of course, these stem cells and gene therapies are a critical component with all the enabling technologies that are coming into play to move it forward. Well, who's opposing it? It still could be social conservatives. It could be philosophers. And if you read the journal, The New Atlantis, and you'll see articles against the medicalization of society, and medicalizing perhaps longevity would be opposed, or the fact that all of this is taking away from us being human. There are a lot of folks out there, more than just bio-Luddites, that have concerns about what the future is going to bring. Now go to Congress. Now create the talking points like the longevity dividend and other things, but realize you're just not giving a message and winning a message. It's actually building a movement.
Yeah, so, effective messaging is a critical component of advocacy. However, when you're working with Capitol Hill and the broader sort of Washington, D.C. community, you have to recognize that there's a lot of politics in politics. So can you tell us a little bit about how you sort of maneuvered through the political landscape of the Hill and the broader Washington, D.C. community, and what you've learned from that experience?
First, it's not just the federal agencies that are critical to understand, and also what makes them tick and what their own agendas are. Think about NIH, the Department of Defense, DARPA, the space program. Every component has its own agenda, its own bureaucracy, and its own proponents in Congress, and indeed the federal government. So when you think about that, you look at the lawmakers that have an expansive view on healthcare, expansive view on the stakeholders, maybe the aging community, and identify the lawmakers that are most likely to support. Clearly bipartisan. This is not a partisan issue. It's a human health issue, right? And that has to be taken into careful consideration. Also, you have to have a set goal. Is the goal just to support the National Institute of Aging? Is it something broader that we need in policy? Maybe tweaks or changes to the regulatory approval pathway? Do we have to really think about longevity, perhaps as a disease, or not longevity, excuse me, aging as a disease? And how do you define longevity and health span? All of these things are not simple things, and there are a lot of different points of view. Where is the common ground that might be able to bring in folks that would normally be against what we would call progress, would look at some of these advancing technologies as a threat, as something dystopian, as something of changing humanity? Again, it's more than the longevity dividend that has to be a much more persuasive case and understood to get the economics of it. But I submit that it's a lot more than messaging, and it's taken a lot to persuade folks on the Hill to support legislation to support this. And I must say, it's more than just a federal level, it's also at a state level as well.
No, yeah, that's a very good point. So, so this next question, I guess you can answer from both a federal and state perspective. As you've been at this for now about 2 decades, what are some of the, the bigger wins that you've seen from your advocacy work?
Well, I alluded to a couple of them before. I would let me expand. Justice Louis Brandeis famously said, states are the laboratories of democracy. And when you look at the different states and the advocacy movement that has supported the field of stem cells and regenerative medicine through state funding and other incentives, we can certainly point to California. And I was on the governing board of Prop 14 that passed in 2020, that added another $5 billion and extended the life of the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine another decade. But also Maryland, where there's been bipartisan support, even with a Republican governor, to support the Maryland Stem Cell Research Fund. And they see it as an aspect not only of a human issue and a health issue, but also economic development. And there are many states that have a lot of incentives, biotechnology opportunity zones, innovation zones, often tied in with university research centers, that makes stem cells and regenerative medicine as a leading edge technology really important, right? So in supporting those in different states, we even see embryonic stem cell research essentially written into state constitutions, right, as a fundamental right in some states. Well, it's interesting. So we see the public support, but we also see the battle against the foes of research that have taken us to court. We've had to take to the public airways at times, and it's been a political wedge issue in the United States. We have filed court cases and defended court cases. Every aspect of human existence, you cut down to it, it's health and the societal interest and mandate across all societies for healing. We have to be mindful of diversity. We have to be mindful of distributive justice, that this just isn't for an elite or the folks with all the funding in the world, but will reach every part and every segment of society. So to do this, you need to create programs of public appreciation. That's what Lincoln said. With public appreciation, you can do anything. Without it, nothing can be done. And we've had hallmarks of campaigns throughout the years, including now working with the FDA, hopefully to work and change guidelines so we won't have to go through the incredibly drug pharmaceutical process to get a cell therapy. And now moving ahead is, how do we harness the energy of the longevity movement, of which the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives is going to play a very, very important role in the future. How do we harness that energy and blend it with the overall idea of advancing these great technologies that are coming, futuristic technologies, and get societal acceptance, and tamp down on the fear factor, at the same time making sure that we all agree on certain boundaries, that societal boundaries and legal boundaries that need to exist. It's a big challenge, and it has to deal with all stakeholders. But let me tell you, 20 years ago, this field was in great stress. And now we're just beginning to realize that the future is now, and with the future shock of these technologies that most of the world doesn't even faintly understand. Well, now it's a consumer movement. My last remark is, we've convinced lawmakers, or many of them, that support for this field is a consumer movement. What I mean by that is not that this is on some great public policy understanding, but if you go and ask the John Q. public, do you support stem cells or stem cell research? 70, 80% will say yes, not because they see it as a public issue, but as a personal health issue to impact their lives, lives of their loved ones, lives of their friends. That is a consumer movement that has teeth in it. Now, whether that same spirit and mandate can be applied to those that support health span and the extension of the healthy human lifespan remains to be seen. But I want to suggest to you that the blueprint is there in front of you if we all choose to look at it.
Well, you sort of already begun to answer this question, but I want to end with sort of a final question about the future for both the longevity industry and the regenerative medicine industry, which share a lot of commonalities. So what sort of future challenges and opportunities do you see for both, the biotech, longevity biotech, and regenerative medicine community? And how do you see us working together to reach that, same end goal of extending healthy lifespan?
I think that there is already that connection. And when you look at the science advisory board that you've built for the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives, you'll see stem cell scientists all over the place and folks that are involved with regenerative medicine. Certainly the excitement for future medicine exists by the amount of capitalization that's being put into different companies and private initiatives to create businesses out of it. This is a powerful thing and important because that's what's going to get this to the finish line. The translation of lab work into society means the creation of cell therapies and medicines and technologies. They're going to take us there. I think that I would point out there are differences between the movements. In the field of longevity and health span, you have to pay attention to the nutraceutical and supplement world that has, of anything, has shown giant public demand for this idea. Now, how much is meritorious and how much might not be, regardless, that's a community that's already convinced. And I take my supplement every day because I feel it's good for my health, and I recommend it to everyone. This is the idea. We have the community there, but it has to congeal in a way and work together.
Well, lastly, before we let you go, because we're just about out of time here, can you tell folks about how they can sign up for the World Stem Cell Summit if they're interested, which will be taking place at the beginning of next month?
Sure. So the we bring the ecosystem of the field, including patient advocates for regenerative medicine and Regenerative Medicine Foundation, Regenerative Medicine Essentials course. And 3 days of that, June 6th through the 8th and the 9th through the 11th, is World Stem Cell Summit. All of the material is videotaped. All of it is online and will be available to registrants until September 1st. So that you go to worldstemcellsummit.com, you register. The price you pay will get you a membership in the trusted network of the Regenerative Medicine Foundation, and you will get your pass to the World Stem Cell Summit. Look at the program, you'll see it covers things that you normally would never see anywhere else, because we realize that this is not just for the scientists and hard data. It has to be for the world and government and citizens, and especially patients, if we're going to get to where we need to go.
Well, Bernie, we really appreciate your time. There's so much we can learn from your over 20 years of experience in regenerative medicine. We look forward to continue to have you as a partner. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And we hope that you can all join us next month as well for the next edition of our policy discussion. So have a good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thank you.